Welcome everyone to the late October and late November meeting of the Transit Committee, which is the New York City Transit Authority, MAB-STOA, and Staten Island Rapid Transit Operating Authority. Thank you, board members, for adjusting your schedules twice to be here today. As we have done every meeting this year, we welcome the chair of our parent authority. Oh, that sounds rather impressive, doesn't it? The chair of our parent authority, Mayor-elect Joe Lota, to our meeting. Thank you, as always, for joining us. On behalf of Transit, we congratulate you and you, Tom Prendergast, and every senior person around this table, and all of our unbelievable 35,000 employees for preparing so perfectly for Hurricane Sandy and for bringing back the buses and subways with such speed and such efficiency. It's not always fun being an unpaid board member of this agency. We're going through fair rise hearings, which aren't a lot of fun, which was preceded by service cutback hearings, which weren't too much fun either. But you guys made us all proud to be members of your team on the MTA Board. We really appreciate everything that you have done, and the job was absolutely fantastic. You also impressed upon all of us how important mass transportation is to all of us who live, work, and visit here. It's vital to our economy, and it's absolutely vital to even our functioning. So thank you all, and well done. Are there any other public speakers?
We have two public speakers, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
The first speaker is Murray Bowden.
Good morning. This is one of those rare opportunities when one has to recognize that leadership of the 21st century was exercised recently. The decision by the operating people at the subway system to make a decision a year or so ago to shut the subways down and clean them was crucial to bringing them back. That kind of thinking to buck public opinion and actually shut a section of the circuit down for 5 days to buy a diesel engine to be able to move equipment back and forth is unprecedented, but a kind of thinking that is exemplary of the new generation of MTA leaders. It happens here. It happens in another section. It doesn't happen in other places. Governor Cuomo has said we have to break down the information silos, which means that we have to think outside the box. Tom, you think outside the box. For a lot of people who don't know just how big a chance you took, I want to thank you on behalf of the many people who got train service back much, much, much faster than had you not done that. Cleaning 40 years of plugged sewers made all the difference in the world. And I don't think that you've been given the recognition that you and Carmine exercised in taking that chance. In retrospect, you did the right thing. More people could learn from your lesson. And you have my personal thanks and the thanks of people who got their subway service back faster than would have been had you not shut them down for 5 nights in a row. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bowden. The second and last speaker is William Henderson.
I also want to rise to thank all the men and women of New York City Transit MTA Bus, who worked so hard to bring service back after Sandy. Is an exemplary effort. One of the things I wanted to highlight is we've talked a lot about the tunnels and the risks and hard work that everyone put into bringing those back. I'd like to talk a little bit about the bus operation, the bus operators who brought back service starting on Wednesday and had far more patience and forbearance than I ever would have behind the wheel. That they really did an exceptional job under circumstances that were not ideal, with no traffic signals, no real means of control, and I think they deserve a great deal of credit. One thing I do want to highlight is in the 2 weeks that 2 Broadway was basically shut down, we experienced a number of people who are dealing with issues having to do with MetroCard claims and reduced fares. Those were also already areas where there was some backlog prior to this, and that's the storm, through no fault of NYC Transit, has made that situation worse. But there are a number of people who are quite desperate, getting quite desperate with problems with reduced fares and claims. They have money on MetroCards that they can't access, and in large part these are people who are least able to deal with these situations financially. I'd ask you to do everything you can to bring that up to date and to get up to a point where the backlog is reduced on those 2 items. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Henderson.
The minutes from our September meeting, for those of you who can remember back that far, are attached to the materials. Are there any additions or corrections? Yes, Andrew.
On page 1.3, President Prendergast noted that the completion of the Bleecker Street station would provide customers with greater flexibility. I think you want to add the language Bleecker Street, Broadway, Lafayette, two-way transfer. Otherwise, it refers to 1904, and I think we've come a long way since then. So,
all right, we'll amend the meeting, those minutes accordingly. Any others?
Yeah, well, I don't think that's properly amended, because it was, in 1904, you could not have made a transfer. The Independent wasn't built, Andrew.
it says completion of the Bleecker Street station. It doesn't say Broadway, Lafayette, Ira.
All right, guys. All right.
But I think it's the transfer that talking
It's only the minutes. All in favor of approving the minutes as supposedly amended? Any opposed? All right, the minutes as amended are adopted. Do we have any changes to the work plan?
There are no changes to the work plan.
Thank you. Before I introduce our fabulous President, Tom Prendergast, I hope that all of you around this side of the table will convey all of our thanks, as the public speakers pointed out, to our 35,000 unbelievable employees, from the bus drivers to the station agents to the people who pumped out the station. They really put their jobs ahead of their personal life. And usually when everything goes right, the board takes credit for it, and whenever something goes wrong, it's the staff who messed up. But I don't think we can take very much credit for this. It was the employees who really showed how wonderful they are and how fabulous they perform. And the chief of the employees is President Tom Prendergast, who will give us a more detailed report of the storm damage.
If we could have the presentation, please. Before I start, I'd like to tell you I feel very privileged to lead an organization of so many outstanding employees. Time and again, when emergencies have occurred, our employers, our employees, have put the needs of the organization and the riding public first, and in some cases even ahead of their families. I can't tell you what it's like when you say goodbye to your spouse and say, you'll see me when you see me, I'll be back when we get things under control. But that exemplifies the majority, the overwhelming majority of all the employees of New York City Transit. This was a joint effort. It was all layers of the organization, hourly, supervisory, and managerial, both operating and administrative. In the midst of this, we had some 3,000 employees displaced at 2 Broadway who did a lot of important administrative functions that support the operating organization, and they did an outstanding job. What I'd like to do this morning is briefly go through with you 3 things. The storm preparations, what we did in advance of the storm. Next slide, please. Starting about a week before, we knew this was going to be a serious storm. We treated it very serious. That was a lesson we learned from the winter storm of 2010. And we started a process of not only analyzing the weather reports as they were coming in, but doing what we needed to do to protect the infrastructure assets, some $500 billion that we're responsible for. And so we started also meeting with our external partners and stakeholders because we provide a key service to a number of different agencies who need to be involved with an evacuation. Starting on Saturday, 3 days before the storm, we began the physical hardening of the system so we could protect it from what we knew was going to be a flood surge, nowhere near as high as we thought it was. It was much higher than we thought it would be, but in any case, we began those preparations. We also had the implementation of an incident command center. Next page, please. Storm preparations, this just gives you an overview of what we've done. Many of our storage yards on the rail side are in low-lying water flood-prone areas. So these are shots of both Coney Island, Stillwell Avenue yards down in Lower Brooklyn, the Lenox Avenue terminal up at 148th Street at the end of the IRT, and the Bowling Green station down in Lower Manhattan. Similar preparations were done for buses because many of the bus depots are also in low-lying areas. And so they had also a very important responsibility of staging buses for the evacuation of residents in Area A. You see work that had been done at Castleton Depot in the North Shore of Staten Island, Gun Hill Depot, and Quill Depot on the west side of Manhattan. And I'd like to talk briefly about the storm event and immediate recovery. Those slides, by the way, are just a snapshot of all the different preparatory actions that we took. A record storm hit New York City on the evening of Monday, October 29th. If you go back to Hurricane Irene about a year ago, I was down in Lower Manhattan when the storm surge hit. It hit about an hour after an astronomical high tide, and the water had just basically lapped up over the surface into Battery Park. This was much higher than that. That evening, Chairman Loda and I were down not too far north of this picture of South Ferry. And at this point, you can see the water is halfway up the doors to the terminal at South Ferry. Joe and I were out there a little bit later, but I can tell you it was very evident how high the storm surge was. It was 13.97 feet on top of an astronomically high tide. There was significant major damage done to the system, and this is just a snapshot of it. We had 8 flooded under river tubes. I know a lot of the press said 7, but we forgot 8. That was the one under Newtown Creek, the G. 8 stations with major flood damage. Staten Island Railway down at the terminal at St. George, also at Tottenville, but also the rail maintenance facility in Clifton. Train yards and bus depots with significant damage, and a total washout of the track structure going across Jamaica Bay, and I'll show you slides of that. There were numerous other locations where we had station canopies blown off, damage done to elevated structure, open cut sections with trees down. So the damage was extensive across the system with some very significant damage at a few locations. I'm going to go through these slides relatively quickly, but this is South Ferry, a relatively new station complex that we just opened up years ago. That lumber you see on the on the station mezzanine is not ours. It's construction timber that floated down from the street, down the stairway into the mezzanine. Another slide of that. Yet another. Yet another. That railing you can't move by hand. I mean, the force of whatever moved that railing, it was probably that timber pile coming down the stairway to flood that complex. This is probably one of the most revealing ones. This is going from the mezzanine down to the track level. Brand new escalators, totally under salt water. We still don't know the extent of the damage to those. There's another picture going down a stairway from the mezzanine down to the track level. Similar. This is down on the platform level after water has been removed. We've taken some pictures. This is one of the next to last stations, actually one of the next to last locations in the system where water was pumped out. This is the supervisor's office on the platform at South Ferry. This looks like a scene from a movie. That's a stairwell going down to the platform at South Ferry. Ceiling level. Next slide. This is 86th Street on the Sea Beach line in Brooklyn. And this is water that is 4.5 to 5 feet deep. Almost all of Lower Brooklyn and the Rockaways were totally inundated with water. This is 148th Street in Harlem at the upper end of the Lenox Avenue line, and you can see the water there. We'd removed all the trains prior to that. Similar shot of 148th Street. This is just one of a number of examples of the flooding we had in under-river tubes. We had 8 under-river tubes flooded to varying degrees. The 2 worst were the 14th Street tube and the Montague Street tube, floor to ceiling. The others were basically half height, 3/4 of a length, but this is an order of magnitude in terms of the amount of water that we had to pump out of those tubes. By far the most serious damage, this is similar to what happened to the Port Jervis line last year. This section of track runs across Jamaica Bay from Lefferts Boulevard out to the Rockaways. To the left is the bay. To the right is a freshwater pond in a protected land area. We had 2 breaches of that where the bay met that freshwater fill. One was about 120 feet long, the other was about 275 feet long, and this is the level of damage. And the damage not only is in terms of the physical understructure of the track, but also the signal and communication lines that run across the bay. In this case, the only thing that held it up was the continuously welded rail. And after the storm, every tidal surge in and out actually undermined the structure worst. This is the broad channel station where whatever debris floated in with the water was left, including this jet ski, including this boat. We had more boats on the right of way than Metro North did, although Metro North's boat was bigger. The bus side of the house suffered as well. I mean, there were trees down on many of the routes that it had to operate on, and they were the first to come back, but they had to deal with things like this. They had to use local power. The local power was out in the interim, and they had to use generator power. This is a bus depot at an MTA bus facility in Far Rockaway. I don't believe it's a total loss, but the assessment is still underway right now in terms of the amount of damage and what it's going to take to reopen. This is depot flooding at 126th Street in Manhattan. The tidal surge in the upper part of Manhattan hit about 3 hours later, closer to 10 or 11 o'clock at night, and it was pretty bad as well. And this is depot flooding at Quill on the west side of Manhattan. This is the Staten Island Railway shop in Clifton. There was a picture in the paper right outside of this shop was a tanker that was dropped right outside the shop about 20 feet. The system we employed in advance of the storm and through the storm was a 4-tiered system. And the existing rail control center and the bus command center operate as usual. We implemented an incident command center. Once issues have such a large magnitude in terms of what it takes to be able to effectuate repairs and get personnel deployed to the site, you need an incident command center. Above that, we have a situation room which is staffed with senior executives from New York City Transit that are making strategic decisions, and they interface directly with the chairman's meetings that would follow our meetings. We had meetings every 4 hours, 8 a.m., noon, 4 p.m., 8 p.m., where we were assessing the damage and aligning and prioritizing resources in terms of how we were going to go back and restore the service to the system. And that was done in close concert with the chairman and the other agency heads, because you have to move in concert so that you can restore service across the system and maximize the benefit for as many customers as possible in as quick a manner as possible. Next slide. I cannot thank the buses division enough. I mean, this is equivalent to putting somebody on a beach with limited resources and say the Air Force is going to be to follow. You got to fend for yourself. On the Wednesday after the storm that afternoon, we put service on the street. Buses put service on the street. They had full service on the street the next day. And if you remember that day, that's when we had gridlock in Manhattan that was almost unbearable. But if the buses had not been back, we could not have been moving the limited number of people we did, but every bus was fully loaded. And it started to restore a sense of confidence in people that we were coming back to normalcy. We also asked them to set up, as we were reinstituting bus service, and the lower Manhattan to Brooklyn connections were all broken because of the flooded under-river tubes. So we could get people to downtown Brooklyn. We could get people as far south as 34th Street. But we needed somebody to be able to bridge that gap between those two distances. And so they put a lot of extra service out in lower Manhattan under extremely difficult conditions because there was no street lighting and no traffic lights. And they put together a 330 bus bridge, operations planning and buses. I've never seen a bus bridge that large. And we had buses departing from 3 different terminals in Brooklyn coming into Manhattan and carrying people. Had it not been for the coordination of effort that they did with New York City Police, Transit Bureau, as well as New York City Police precincts, and their own supervision, we could not have moved as many people as we did. But once again, it was another layer of restoring normalcy to the system. All we're trying to show with this slide is that it's difficult to see. We'll hand out copies of the presentation. But what we've done is, on a map of the system, dark color codings are where the system was operated, light is where it was out of service. And then, 2 days after the storm, we had, I think, a little bit over 50% of the system up and running. And then each day we were incrementally adding to that to try to restore normalcy. 9 days after the storm, we had well into the 90% of service restored. Longer-term recovery and preparing for the future. Right now, we still have elements of the system that are out. We're working feverishly to try to get them back. We don't have service across Jamaica Bay going out to the Rockaways. We were able to transport by motor transport 20 cars to restore shuttle service on the Rockaways so that we can take people to Far Rock and then shuttle them by bus to Howard Beach where they can access the normal train system. South Ferry, number one is the trains are not running into South Ferry Station. They're using the old loop, but the last stop is Rector Street. South Ferry Station, I think you saw by the slides, is extremely damaged station, and we have not completed our assessment yet, and we do not know how long it will take, but it's months before we return to service.
Just a quick question. That shuttle from Far Rockaway to Howard Beach, is that nonstop?
The bus shuttle is nonstop.
It is
yes,
nonstop.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
And is that a better idea than having it stop at where the subway stations were and then go nonstop to Howard Beach?
There's no way. Well, first of all, it's running from, I think, Beach Holland, Beach 90th and Holland, up to Far Rock, the shuttle on the Rockaways, and then they're transferring. They're not paying a fare at that point on the bus shuttle. They pay the fare when they reach Howard Beach. But the best way to handle the most customers is the shuttle we've set up. The next area, well, it is a long trip, but it's probably the best trip that we can get. The R is still operating in 2 sections, from the north down to 34th Street and from the south up to J Street Metrotech. Our next action is to try to extend the R down to Rector Street and then open up service through the Montague Street Tube. We do not know exactly when we'll be able to use Whitehall as a station stop. That's a very deep station, and the viability of the escalator at the south end, the escalator at the north end is out of service for rehabilitation anyway. Escalator at the south end, we don't know the damage, and it's a long vertical climb upstairs. But there is a possibility we would restart that service and not stop at Whitehall, because right now the 4 and 5 are getting oversubscribed. Everybody who comes across the ferry who normally takes the R is walking up to the 4 and 5 at Bowling Green. And then the people who normally ride the R through the Montague Street Tube from Brooklyn are transferring to the 4 and 5. So the 4 and 5 are getting hammered. The J and Z between Chambers and Broad Street still not in service because of the signal damage. And the Far Rockaway Bus Depot, as I said earlier. One unique thing you need to know about the Montague Street Tube, it is the only tube we have where we have a mid-course diversion in that tube. You either go Broad Street or Broadway up the Broadway line. And that's where the Central Instrument House was for about 100 signal relays, and it was totally damaged during the storm. I'm going to pass around, this is a printed circuit board that has seen saltwater damage, and I think it tells you the story. We have other signal relays and communication relays down here on the floor that you can see. Saltwater does exceptionally high level of damage to equipment, more so than fresh water because of the conductivity nature of it. Reconstruction work on the Rockaways began immediately. Although our forces have the capability of doing this, had we done it with our resources, it would actually dilute their ability to do work in other parts of the system. So we let an emergency contract to bring in somebody with heavy-duty construction equipment to begin that effort. I believe they've now poured concrete and overlaid ballast on the 2 breached section. Is that correct? I think there's 900 cubic yards on one and 2,000 cubic yards on the other. Tremendous job by J-Track. I think they're a subsidiary of Judlow, but they're doing a fantastic job. But this is just part of the story. We then now have to do signal and communications work, and we still don't know exactly when we're going to have the Rockaways back. Beyond the known issues that I've talked about, we are going to have a number of latent issues. We're going to have issues where damage to equipment we know has occurred, but we can't quantify what that damage is. When I say quantify, I can't quantify it in terms of how much useful life has been taken out of that piece of equipment or that component. So we know we're going to experience probably an accelerated frequency of failures on signals communication and other mechanical devices, and we're going to have to struggle through with those. Where we know failures are going to occur, we'll replace ahead of time, but it's an issue that we know we're going to have to manage aggressively moving forward. The other thing that we want to be able to do is work very carefully with planning and learning from this experience. For those of you that didn't play with electric trains when you were younger, one of the things you did learn is that you can't do anything to move a train if you don't have electric power. And the issue, first of all, Con Edison did a tremendous job in terms of restoring power to us. The level of coordination at all levels between Con Ed and New York City Transit was excellent, because that's the name of the game. Where they can get us power, aligned with where we can turn trains for terminal operations is key. And so ops planning, working with operations and Con Ed, was able to restore service, getting the maximum benefit for people. We want to plan ahead so that if we have similar type emergencies, we have some of these already pre-planned and staged. But once again, what will dictate to us what we can do is the availability of power, not just on the Con Ed network side, on our network side as well. We did a pretty good job of posting information signs as well. I mean, one of the benefits of the urban panels that we have with the advertising contract, I believe, I don't know if Paul's here, but I believe we were able to change the message on those signs and letting people know at the street level that service was out at those stations, and it's a heck of a lot better than having somebody to descend to the platform level. But there was an awful lot of public outreach in terms of letting people know on a very, very regular basis what services were up and running and what weren't up and running. There's one thing that the governor said that I couldn't agree with more, and that's that we've got to look forward in a much more proactive way about the infrastructure build that we have. We cannot just sit back and wait and say, well, there may be another one of these in 15 or 20 years. Whatever the cause, the frequency of them is increasing. And the chairman has asked us to make sure to take a look at what we can do to be prepared for that, either in the way of hardening the system and doing things to mitigate impacts that occur to us, and reach out to other stakeholders at the federal and state level to see where they can assist us. There's roles that we have a responsibility to play, there's roles that they have a responsibility to play, and we need to make sure that we exercise all of those. Because it's not just the fact that we want to protect the system, it's I think what it demonstrated, for those of you, for anyone out there that was doubting, that if you don't have a working subway and bus system in New York City, the city cannot function. It just cannot function. You need both. Examples of things that we're going to look at. These are not in prioritized order, nor are they exhaustive, but there are things we're going to look at in terms of what we can do to make improvements to the system or make investments to the system to harden it and better enable it to withstand events like these. One of the things is we didn't get heavy rain. Had we got heavy rain, it would have been even worse in terms of flooding. But we didn't get heavy rain. We did get high winds. We got winds, I think the highest recorded wind speed was 100-mile-an-hour gusts out in Staten Island, but sustained winds in the 60s. That's why we had canopies and trees down along right-of-way. But the tidal surge, and the tidal surge of 14 feet, 13.97 on top of a astronomical high tide in a full Category 1 did this level of damage. Can you imagine what a 2 or a 3 would bring? So we do have to do things proactively to harden the system. Lessons from Sandy, I think things that worked well. We have learned from some of the mistakes from the storm, but we had the dry run last year with Hurricane Irene. The chairman set up the conference calls so all the agencies were strategically aligned, and there was advance notice and preparation for the storm. And we went into action relatively quickly once the storm passed. There's a point I want to make sure people understand. We define 0 hour in the hurricane plan as the time at which sustained speeds reach 39 miles an hour or greater. At that point in time, we are really putting our employees at risk if we put them out on the system, either on the bus side or the rail side, certainly on elevated structure. And so we have to have everything buttoned down and put to bed by the time we know sustained wind speeds are going to be 39 miles an hour. then you wait for the storm event to pass, and you really can't put them back out there and expose them until the sustained winds come down below that level. We've now learned that with 2 storms, but it does give you a time to align resources and mobilize people so you can try to hit the ground running. We're going to have a number of workshops internally and working with others to see what we can do to improve it, and we'll have a number of face-to-face debriefs. We can always learn from every incident we've had, and this one certainly is another example of that. I'd like to close with the same comment that I believe the chair of the committee stated, and I know the chairman of the MTA feels. Thank all the employees. There wasn't a layer of this organization that didn't put the organization first and work 16 to 20-hour days. Hourlies, supervision, management, operations, and administration. And what you saw here was the product of all of those employees working together.
Thank you, Tom, for that concise, fabulous, and astonishing report. It was fascinating. Chuck?
I have a question based on that under the tunnel picture. Do you have any ideas at the moment as to how much rolling stock, whether on the train side or the bus side, has been lost or damaged to a very significant degree?
We had some cars up at the end of the line that were subjected to water, about 8 cars in a location that is at 207th Street, but outside of that, no damage whatsoever in terms of buses or rail equipment.
And secondly, so that the bulk of the expense that you have is the infrastructure in terms of rails, escalators, stations, and the like. Is that it?
Well, in terms of infrastructure that's damaged, which we have to restore, but there are costs that we incurred in preparation of the event and managing through the event that we would expect reimbursement on, and we will keep track of those costs as well.
Okay.
All right, folks, we're now going to go into the operations report, and since this is our first 2-month combined meeting, the materials in the book are both for August and September, but in the presentation today, we're going to focus on September. Back to you, Tom.
Carmen Bianco, operations report.
Thank you, Tom, and good morning, everyone. And I just want to highlight what Tom said. An amazing organization to work with, the Department of Subways, our employees, our managers, our supervisors. Just amazing to be part of that process over the 14 or 15 days following, the 4 or 5 days leading into the storm and the 2 weeks following the storm. Just an amazing group to work with, and I'm very thankful to be a part of the leadership team. I'd like to talk about September's results. In terms of the 12-month rolling average for system-wide weight assessment, it was up 0.7 of a point over September of 11. If you look at the on-time performance, both for August and September, while it was pretty steady on the B division, you'll see that on the A division there were some particular areas that were that are notable, where you see a significant decline in on-time performance. I can tell you that in each of those cases, it's absolutely tied to a number of events that occurred during those months, events involving mechanical problems either on equipment or on the tracks itself, to activities involving a customer, where we perhaps had a customer struck by train, and also to a couple of very disruptive construction projects that we had along the way. While it's important for us to stay focused on-time performance, what I really want to highlight on the IRT is that while we took the hit on on-time performance, we actually see an improvement of almost 3 percentage points in weight assessment. And I just want to highlight, I know we say this month after month, but the importance for us is really to make sure that that we're delivering service that is regular, that our customers expect. If they expect the train to be there on a headway of 3 or 4 or 5 minutes, that's what we need to deliver on. We need to make sure that that's intact. And frankly, I mean, when you think about our service, while we never want to take our eye off of on-time performance, most of our customers are not really concerned about the train reaching its terminal. They may not even know what interval they're on, but they do know when the trains are crowded. They do know when they're waiting there 5, 6, 7 minutes and no train shows up and they expect it in 4. So wait assessment to us is really it's an important indicator, and it's something we work on, and even to the extent that it may cause further, it may degrade on-time performance, it's still the area that we want to work on. So now think about it. When you think about on-time performance, it talks about a train making its final destination within 5 minutes, not skipping any stops. When you're really trying to mitigate from a weight assessment perspective, you're trying to move the trains with the flexibility you can to really get back to when you have an incident, to get back to as regular a schedule as possible, which may mean you miss a couple stations, and that's okay. It means that we're going to worry about reliability of the railroad and make sure we're doing all the critical maintenance that we have to, which means we may have to put flagging out there. That slows the service down. If that's what we have to do to make sure that we stay safe and reliable, we are going to do that. So that's the story on both on-time performance and weight assessment. If I can move on to mean distance between failure, it decreased slightly in September by 0.7 of a point, but the 12-month rolling average is at 166,392 miles. That's down 3.4 percentage point from the preceding 12 months. Moving on to the KPIs, KPI for service was at 82.6. That was unchanged. The PES KPI was down 0.3 of a point in September. And for Staten Island, the PES score was up 7.1%. Just a footnote before I conclude that because of Superstorm Sandy, we did in fact miss one iteration of Fast Track that we canceled as a result of the storm, but we did complete this year's program at this point. So again, thank you to all the members of the Department of Subway team and all the departments that support us for that very successful program. Thank you.
Thank you, Carmen. Questions for Carmen? Andrew?
Carmen, you and I, discussed the downside of the number 2's on-time performance, and you had mentioned that it was a couple of major incidents that took place that influenced the number 2. But if you look at the car reliability, it appears that the 142s and the 142As are suffering some major failure of some kind. Can you just explain?
Well, the 142As, I think, the timing for them going through the modification over to 188s, it's almost like their SMS. You start to see a failure rate that you would anticipate as the cars get ready to move into that kind of a process. But on the 142s, the correlation for the number 2 line, there were a couple of incidents that were disruptive that were mechanically related, but it's hard to glean from the chart you're looking at the impact of 1 or 2 incidents on that car fleet.
So it's more of a late GO or
it could be, yeah. It could be, yeah.
Or as we discussed, a couple of people offing themselves.
Listen, every month I can tell you, my team and I, we spend hours poring over delays and what's causing them and why we're seeing on-time performance, up and down in different areas. And it's always across the spectrum on what's going on out there. Very seldom can we put our finger on just 1 or 2 things that are really driving it. It's usually, it's across the spectrum.
So
number of incidents.
what portion of the 142As are being converted? Are all of them being converted to 188s?
What is it? It's 300. I may have the numbers wrong. Like 370.
370. All right. Cheryl Kennedy, was everybody safe in the last 2 months?
Yes. Subway customer safety results for the month of August and employee safety results for the month of September were not available as of the printing of this report. It involved issues relative to the closing of 2 Broadway and also some computer-related issues dealing with that building. So safety results for July and August were as follows. In the month of July, the accident rate decreased 16.7%, moving to 2.44 per million subway customers from a rate of 2.93 in July last year. The subway customer accident rate also decreased by 8.3% over the previous 12-month period. The employee lost time accident rate decreased 3.2% for the month of August 2012 versus August 2011. The rolling 12-month rate was 3.24, down 4.7 from the previous year. There were 62 confirmed fires for the month of August, down 18.4% from the previous year. Excuse me. I have a little cold, sorry.
Got to stay away from that asbestos.
That's right. Okay, there were 62 confirmed fires for the month of August, down 18.4% from the previous year. Additionally, fires decreased over the last 12 months by 22.1%. 61 fires, or 98.4% of all fires, were categorized as being low or average in severity for the month of August. Contributing to the reduction in fires was the removal of debris and steel dust and the cleaning of insulators during fast track. Year-to-date through August 2012, fires in fast-track areas were reduced 62.3% from 61 to 23 versus year-to-date August 2012.
Thank you, Cheryl. Questions for Cheryl? All right, we now turn to our aptly named crime maven, Chief Joe Fox. Joe.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mark. Good morning, all. During the month of October, the Transit Bureau experienced a decrease in subway crime. Total major felonies were reduced by 1.8%, or 4 incidents. October also saw a decrease in robberies of 31%, 50 versus 73. And September saw a decrease in robberies of 18%, 58 versus 71. I'm pleased to point out that due to the hard work and dedication of our Transit Bureau members, October 2012 is the 4th straight month where there was either less crimes or no increase in crimes committed compared to the same period in 2011. I'd like to thank Joe Loda, Tom Prendergast, and Carmen Bianco, and the senior management, the MTA, for their cooperation during the system shutdown. Clearly, the decision prevented harm to the riding public, our officers, and all the equipment that would have been exposed. Discussions between the senior vice president of subways and I began several days prior to Sandy hitting our area. We put a plan in effect to maximize the number of personnel available to aid in the system shutdown, secure the system during the storm, and assist in resuming post-storm services as seamlessly as possible. Our plan involved assigning officers to extended tours, relieving each officer in the field on a face-to-face basis, ensuring personnel were on hand and that stations would remain secure. In the hours after the storm, our officers were deployed to shuttle bus locations to aid those using the interborough shuttle buses. Working together with New York City Transit, our personnel were rapidly redeployed as needed to critical transfer points and stations where the possibility of overcrowding was anticipated. I'm pleased to report that during this period, there were no major incidents within the subway related to the shutdown. With all these challenges, many of our Transit Bureau members also assisted the communities in the vicinity of the districts throughout the system shutdown, where there were many people affected. The Transit Bureau continues to support the communities in these affected areas. Several of our Transit Bureau facilities also experienced damage or disruption resulting from the storm. Among the facilities located within the more severely affected areas is Transit District 23 in Rockaway. This district was overcome by several feet of water on the ground level, causing our personnel to evacuate to the 2nd floor. Likewise, District 34 in Coney Island on Surf Avenue was flooded with 5 feet of water during the storm, again displacing officers to the building's 2nd level. Given the power outages below 42nd Street in Manhattan, Districts 2 and 4, both in Lower Manhattan, were also adversely affected. Each of these districts experienced a loss of power for 5 days. They were able to maintain operations and the working conditions. Despite these disruptions, we experienced no loss in police services. I'd like to thank the MTA also for their help in assisting the cleanup of these facilities. I'd also like to note some of the outstanding crime-fighting results during the reporting period. On October 4th, a decoy operation conducted by our Manhattan Transit Task Force resulted in the arrest of Troy Watkins, a known grand larceny recidivist. He was charged with grand larceny after removing an iPhone from a decoy officer's backpack. Watkins has 25 prior arrests, including 7 for robbery and 6 for grand larceny. 2 weeks later, another grand larceny arrest was made with the assistance of our closed-circuit TV cameras. Our officers observed the suspect use a razor to cut a sleeping victim's pants pocket and then remove his wallet as the victim sat on a platform bench at the Brooklyn Bridge Station. Thomas Coles, with 36 prior arrests, including arrest for grand larceny, robbery, burglary, and arrest for attempted murder, was placed in custody. As subway service resumes, we'll continue to maintain these operations and have brought us recent success in curbing crime. Any questions or suggestions, I welcome.
Thank you, Chief Joe Fox.
Chief, first I would like to congratulate you and your men and women for the spectacular job you continue to do.
Thank you, sir.
I have a question and I have a suggestion, if I may. If you will look at page 3.57 of the book, you will see that on a per day felonies, there thus far through October are more felonies than at any time since the year 2000. We are now at 7.38 through October, and in the year 2001 it was 7.28. In the year 2000 it was 7.99. And the question I have is whether or not there is something that can be done, it's a point I've made before, in terms of tracking what happens once your men and women make the arrests they do, in terms of making sure that justice is served thereafter, whether or not that can be tracked either by a third party, by the police department, by this agency or some other agency. And I just simply ask that at some point someone focus on that, because there's something wrong when your folks are working as hard as they do and achieving the results that they achieve, that we're back to 2000, 12 years, the worst, the largest number of felonies since 2000. The second point I would ask is, again, a point I made earlier, which is that the idea of having a transit court where they can focus on the recidivists, the people who do it again and again and again and never get it right. It seems to me that we've got to do something here. This is not a good trend. You've made that point repeatedly. You've asked for the help to get it done, and I congratulate you for it. But we need to focus on this because the trend is really not good.
Sir, thank you, Chuck. That 7.1 average is reflective of the crime spikes with the electronics that we've seen citywide, not only in the transit system, which we're dealing with, and that's why we had that our last 4 months with actual reductions in 3 of them and breaking even in 1. So that's pretty indicative of the trend reversing. As far as the district attorneys, I have a great relationship with each of their executives, the CO level, me and the DAs, and point well taken to follow up on these crimes, and we do, and we continue to explore how we can work with the DAs to build cases and stress the importance, and I get that a positive response from each. I've actually met with all the DAs and with constant communication, and as far as individual members tracking them, that would be available through the DA's offices.
I make the point again about the transit court, which I know the chairman has tried to pursue with the city government. My point is that those 2 issues need to be possible avenues for dealing with this. The third is one that the state legislature has in its power to do, which is to follow the custom of the state of California and provide that effective, say, 2 or 3 years from now, no smartphone or other like device shall be sold without a safety mechanism along the lines that have been explored and explored successfully. But it seems to me that what needs to be done is we need to focus on these numbers, not because of what they are today, but the trend they portend. And the trend ain't good.
Point well taken, but the trend is actually better. We've actually had reductions for the last 4 months, 3 of the last 4. And it's by addressing these electronic thefts and awareness and community awareness and thousands and thousands of flyers. We have those operations going every day, and all of these that I've mentioned. But thank you.
And if I could just add something to Commissioner Merdler, it's not that large a spike considering it's a much larger number of riders in the system compared to those other years. Much larger ridership. So that has to be taken into account too, doesn't it?
And we also have to take into account, however, the fact that many people whose electronics and other items of property are taken from them do not even report it. So these numbers thus have that factor throughout. Nobody comments, nobody blames the department. I understand. I want you to understand.
Oh, I understand that,
or the men and women that work in it. It just seems to me we ought to get to focus on this. It's not too different from the squeegee men of years gone by in terms of trying to cut this sort of crime out.
All right, thank you, Chief Joe Fox. Back to you, Tom, for finance.
Preliminary September 2002 farebox revenue was $312.6 million, 7.8 million or 2.6% above forecast. Year-to-date farebox revenue was $2.79 billion, 21.7 million above forecast. The average non-student fare in September 2012 was $1.63, 1.639. In constant 1996 dollars, the September average fare fell from $1.38 in 1996 to $1.08 in 2012.
$1.08 in 1996 dollars? That's
Yes.
what they're paying?
That's what the numbers show.
You believe that?
The preliminary September 2012 operating expenses before depreciation and OPEB were higher than forecast by $10.7 million, 2.2%. Labor expenses exceeded forecast by $8.1 million, or 2.3%, due largely to higher overtime expenses caused by additional vacancy coverage in some titles and maintenance requirements, increased workers' compensation expenses, and lower overhead credits resulting from reimbursable payroll underruns. Non-labor expenses overran forecast by $2.6 million, or 1.9%. Year-to-date operating expenses were above forecast by $28.5 million. Labor expenses were higher by $48.9 million, due mostly to higher NYSERS accrued pension expenses and increased overtime requirements. Non-labor expenses were less than forecast by $20.3 million, including the favorable timing of expenses benefiting several accounts and underruns in paratransit service contracts, electric power, and other business expense. Ridership, September 2012 ridership, total 192.9 million, 0.1% above forecast, below forecast. Year-to-date ridership was 1.765 billion, 0.3% above forecast. The average weekday ridership was 5.5 million, an increase of 2% from September 2011. This was the highest average weekday subway ridership of any September in over 45 years, so that trend continues. 3 weekdays in September 2012 exceeded the highest one-day ridership of the past 25 years. The highest was 5.85 million riders recorded on September 27th. September 2012 average weekday local bus ridership was 2.2 million, an increase of 1.2% from the prior September. September average weekday express bus ridership was 44,000, an increase of 4.1% over the prior September, and the September 2012 average weekday paratransit ridership was 30,000, an increase of almost 4% from the prior September. An early look at preliminary October 2012 financial results. We're not able to provide that due to the problems resulting from Superstorm Sandy, and they're not available at this time. It's most likely that revenues will be below budget because we had 2 fare-free days and limited service days other months. But as soon as we get those numbers, we will report them.
Questions for Tom? Okay, Fred, how about anything left in our capital?
Yes. We were able to make awards in September totaling $96 million. The major awards included 3 separate projects to upgrade ventilation systems at 21 of our communication rooms at selected priority locations throughout the subway system. And on the fleet side, 1 new purchase of 90 articulated buses. For completions, the most significant project was rehabilitation of our heating system at our 207th Street overhaul shop in Manhattan.
Thank you, Fred. Any questions for Fred? All right, now we've got some serious work to do on procurements, folks. Where are you, Steve?
Good morning. The procurement package, which presents both New York City Transit and MTACC procurements, includes 19 actions totaling $54.9 million in expenditures. This month's agenda also includes a request to authorize an expedited change order process during the R179 train procurement. The Board has previously approved such a process for past car procurements. I ask for your approval of all actions in the agenda.
Any questions on the procurement items for Steve or anybody else? Chuck?
I'd like you to focus on page 5.2 and then 5.10. The question I have relates to how do you deal with the issue that you let a contract, you have a specific number, and then the mods and the revisions and the add-ons wind up coming to very significant numbers. One of the things you propose here is to allow that you can give procurement orders or change orders or the like rapidly, and nobody would disagree with that. The question is, why isn't it a better way than to, or an additional way of providing for retrospective review of whether the numbers that were billed were appropriate or whether or not on audit they were excessive, in terms of trying to halt the practice, if there be a practice, of putting in a bid and then later on amending it, it comes in telephone numbers higher than you had originally anticipated or the Board had voted on.
We are still going to, and we intend to, and have in the past with all the other car procurements that have undergone this expedited process, to negotiate all of the change orders, review the pricing, and ensure that any change order we issue is fair and reasonable. So we go through that, and we have audit involved in actions that are over $1 million. All this asks for is the ability to approve them so as not to impact the manufacturing process and just basically just avoid the Board approval process. But all the other procedures that would otherwise go and be in place for a Board action or any other action are still in place.
What I am seeking to ask you to take a look at is the possibility of including a retrospective audit, not to change the practice of intermediate action so that the work is done promptly, but after the event, putting it into the agreements, that after the events you audit to see whether or not the costs were excessive or things were done that were not appropriate.
Steve,
a practice you follow in other areas.
We actually do that. I mean, the entire process of any procurement, and especially car procurements, the nature of the car procurements are such that we need this mechanism. But they're subject to audit throughout the entire process. They're subject to audit at each individual change order, and they're subject to audit before closeout. There have been many times where we can take a look at that contract, and if we feel that there's something that needs to be, because we retain money. What do we retain? About 5% on the contract, and this dollar, that's a large dollar amount. So we can use that audit to, and the holdback of those monies to effectuate remediation if we feel it's necessary. So we do those audits at the back end of the contract.
Good. Thanks.
All right, any further questions on the procurements? Is there a motion to approve them? Second? All in favor? Any opposed? Procurements carry. Service changes. Peter? You're still here, Peter, right? Okay.
Sorry, in Section 6 we have for information informing the committee of subway schedule changes planned for the summer schedule, which goes into effect in June, where we're going to have a increase in service on the number 1, 7, and J lines. These are due to ridership increases that have been occurring as you've heard. We continue to grow on the subway side, and that has continued to accelerate. In the case of the subways, we're largely constrained during rush hours by track capacity and the number of cars we have, but in the off peaks and shoulders, we are able to add some service, and we're adding on the J on Saturdays in the evenings, and on the 7 in various off-peak afternoon and evening periods, and on the 1 also in the evening. Some additional service.
By the way, folks, when service comes back, it's Peter who sends it back. So he had a lot to do this month. But it doesn't go back unless he blesses it, as I understand it, right?
What the chair is trying to say is when you're trying to restore service in a system that is in an abnormal state, the ability to make that decision in concert with what infrastructure can provide and what power can provide is instrumental. And he provides a lot of the input in terms of where you can get your biggest bang for your buck.
He didn't do it as well as Tom. Any other questions for Peter?
Special reports stand on their own in terms of what we've submitted. On a quick note, the EEO and diversity report on workforce utilization will be presented in December rather than was going to be presented now. We do have the elevator and escalator performance report covering the third quarter of 2012, and you will note that the escalator and elevator performance continue to improve this quarter as compared to the third quarter in 2011. Elevator availability was 97.4%, and escalator availability was 96.5%. Both of those performances surpassed goals. And the final report in there is the transit adjudication report. But they're normally submitted for information. If you've got any questions, we can entertain them.
Any questions on that, Chuck?
I have two things I'd like to call to your attention, if I may. The escalator service on 53rd Street, Lexington 53rd Street, showed 276 outages, as I gather it. Am I wrong?
Would you know off the top of your head, Joe, or no? We'll get an answer.
Would you take a look at the 53rd Street one?
Sure.
Because it's a fairly well-traveled...
it's a very deep escalator, too. A very important escalator. We'll get a response back to the committee.
Okay.
In written form.
All right, capital construction. We turn the meeting over to Dr. H., a name which has now become universal in the last 2 months, saving countless hours at the MTA of people trying to pronounce and correct your name. And now we're only going to refer to you as Dr. H. It's stuck.
That's when my 5-year-old granddaughter is able to actually spell and write her name. So, pretty good. We were actually spared any damage on any of our projects. The only close call was on the around 96th Street, where the water actually got as close as 30 feet to us between 1st and 2nd Avenue, but we had really no damage. The impact that we had overall had to do with the supply chain that was interrupted, the fact that the plants could not get cement, that impacted our ability to get delivery of concrete, as well as the fact that there was short supply on fuel. That actually had some impact, but nothing that at this point we believe we cannot correct. Fulton Center, in effect, we opened actually in October the the Day Street entrance to 4-5, and it looks truly spectacular, as well as we started to take down actually before Sandy the scaffolding around Corbin, and people can look at that, and it truly looks as if it was in 1889 when it actually opened. At this point, the RFP to the master lessee was slightly delayed, yet we expect, we already received submissions for qualifications last Friday, on November 16, actually. This is before Thanksgiving. And the business terms and development are due on December 7. We expect to get them on time. Regarding the extension, number 7 line extension, at this point we're close to 80% of construction complete. Again, the various components are very advanced. Site L, that is the 41st Street and Dyer, basically we had substantial completion and it was turned over. Again, Site J, we're about 94% complete, and we expect in December again to turn it over. to the next contractor, as well as Site K, that is about 2 months ahead of schedule and will be done by December. We do have some, again, supply chain issues. A lot of the systems manufacturers are giving priority, in fact, to manufacturing new systems for not only for our system but others. So that may impact our ability to actually complete it on time because of the not having the proper parts. But we're working on it. So at this point, I'm withholding any predictions, but I just wanted to make sure that you are kept informed on that. Second Avenue, we are progressing well. We had some issues again with the supply chain, but we have been able to make adjustment and mitigate some of it at 86th Street, it's proceeding well. There's not much more to say. The one thing that is worth mentioning is the fact that the mock houses, the big structures that we have on 2nd Avenue, the first one around 72nd Street will remove starting in April of 2013, and the second one in August. So that will be nice for the people working there, or living there rather, that they will not see these really large structures. That's about it. Thank you.
Questions for Dr. H?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
The lost time injury rate for the 2nd Avenue project seems to be above the BLS, the standard. It just went above these past few months. I'm just wondering if there's an explanation for that, or what's being done to try to get it back down again.
We are at this point working with a contractor. This is particularly at 72nd Street. We experienced a certain amount of increased number of accidents, and we are actually looking to see as to why. We are not yet clear. We're working with the contractors to make sure that the trend is reversed.
Any other questions for Dr. H? All right, we're now going to conclude the transit part, and we will start bus at 11:30 on schedule. Thank you, everybody, for being concise and for moving with panther-like grace. Thank you.
11:30.